Hi, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about what happened in this week's Parshat Shmini when Nadav and Avihu offered up a strange fire, and in response, God took their lives. And right after that, Moshe says to Aaron that he always knew, Hashem said, B'krovai Akedesh, that those who are close to me, I will be sanctified through those who are close to me. And I had always learned that Moshe had known that two people were going to die on that day. He thought it was Moshe and Aaron, and now that it was Nadav and Avihu, he knows that they are holier than them, and they were the ones that God chose to be sanctified through. But I'd like to share a thought that occurred to me when I read those words, because it made me think of when Moshe was supposed to speak to the rock. God told him to speak to the rock to bring forth water for the people, and he chastised the people. He called them rebels. You think you can't bring water forth from this rock, and then he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And when God reprimands him, he says that they're going to be punished. He says, Lo hamantan, you didn't have the faith in me to sanctify me, to sanctify me in the eyes of the nation. And he uses the same terminology, that this was for the opposite purpose, a lack of sanctification in the eyes of the people. And we're going to juxtapose that to here, when Moshe said right away that God said that through my holy ones I will be sanctified. And I think that the essential point to take from that is that one aspect of what makes someone or an act holy is not the thing in and of itself, but how it's done, or the response to a situation. And when Moshe hit the rock, that was a lack of a sanctification of God's name, because he responded in anger. He called people names and he hit the rock, and that, as a representative of God, is not sanctifying God's name. God doesn't want that kind of response. And when Moshe told Aaron that through my holy ones I will be sanctified, right away we're told Vayidom Aaron, the famous words that Aaron was silent. And that's also a measure of a person's greatness, is when you're feeling overwhelmed with emotion and you want to say certain things that maybe you should not say, and you take that moment and you're just silent, absorbing it and taking it in. And that's the true faith that he had. He had emunah. He understood that what God did was just, for whatever reason, as painful as it was for him at that moment. And he was going to be quiet until he had the proper words to say. And right then and there, his being quiet was a sanctification of God's name. Sometimes being quiet or still or doing nothing is what is needed to sanctify God's name. And that's really, really important. In terms of him being a leader of the people, and he was the one who was supposed to bring atonement for the sins of the people, that he has to know when to be silent, when to speak. And we know Aaron was the greatest lover of mankind. No one, we're told, comes to Aaron, and he felt pain of the people like his own pain, and therefore he was not to act out any differently with the death of his own children than any other tragedy for Am Yisrael. And he had to put that aside and continue with the inauguration ceremonies. And he only spoke out once Moshe again came and said to the children left over, Lazar and Tamar, why aren't you eating from the sacrifice, from the, And Aaron says, is that what God really wants at this point in time from me? And he understood. He understood really the essence of what it's about, that maybe he had to display to the people stellar qualities of acceptance and emunah and quiet in a moment of celebrating the inauguration of the Mishkan, and he had a greater job at that moment. But when it came to his own personal, internal ingesting of something that represents, atonement for sin, at that point he felt personally, on a personal level, that was not what was required from him at that moment. And he understood how to separate that, his role as a leader for the people, being quiet and doing what needs to be done, and his own personal activity of what he needs to do in a situation that God gave him. And that's what made Aaron so great. And that is the action that sanctified God's name and really made him the appropriate person to be the Kohen Gadol, to represent the people, which would be challenged later on by Korach. And that accusation of nepotism is a joke in face of what Aaron had to undergo. Is it nepotism to be holden to such strict justice and to suffer deaths of the children, and to take on a role that's not a role so much, there's glory in that role, but it comes with a huge price tag of obligation. And he did that really well. And that was the sanctification of God need. And sometimes we have to do that. Stay quiet, stay still. And now might be something that we can understand exactly that. Anyways, wishing you Shabbat Shalom.